And hello, I'm Eamonn O'Brien, and you're very, very welcome to the Reluctant Speakers Club Expert Series. And I am absolutely thrilled to invite a pal of mine in today to have a chat with us. It is Noel Darby, a brand guru and marketing expert, and the owner of Brand Advocates. And today we're going to talk about the power and the importance of story. And it doesn't matter whether it's just because you need story when you're on the stage as a speaker, or indeed when you're thinking about it in a broader sense for almost any kind of content like today, or any other form of content, maybe in written form. So we have a perfect person to chat with about that today. So you're very welcome.
Thanks, Eamonn. Thank you.
Now, I know that you spend a lot of time in the brand side of things, constantly talking to people about the power of story. So whether you're promoting a product, a brand, a company, or indeed nowadays you have to promote maybe the people promoting all of those things. Why is story so really important?
Well, because, I think it starts, storytelling is part of humanity. Every one of us have, at one stage or another, either pestered our mother to buy a packet of sweets that we don't need, or convinced another party, sometimes your wife or your husband, that you're worth marrying. The success or otherwise of that is dependent totally on how compelling your story is, often how memorable your story is.
Yeah.
Some brands are very good at storytelling. The big brands tend to be better than the smaller brands because they've been at it longer, and they've found out how to, if you will, uncover the story, the essence of their brands and the meaning of those brands to people, and then form an emotional relationship with whoever they're trying to sell the product to.
Exactly. Well, that's a really interesting thing, because you talked about one of the most important elements that I think is involved in storytelling, which is about the emotional connection.
Yes.
So when I'm talking with people about how to connect more effectively with an audience, this is a central theme where people really kind of get involved. But why is emotional connection so important? Why does it actually almost have to be a lead in the stories that you tell when you're promoting a product or an idea?
Well, because usually if it's unemotional, it's not going to be committed to memory. Yeah. And part of the ongoing art of advertising or communication is telling a memorable story.
Exactly that.
Or in your case, speaking memorably.
That's exactly it. Yeah. If you don't speak memorably, then what happened?
Yeah. And comedians, everybody relies on, a great story. Even criminals rely on a great story.
Sometimes it's hard to keep that story straight. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the other interesting thing is that I've found through my career is that very often brand owners, small or big, haven't really uncovered what their story should be and how it's relevant. Recently, I was speaking with an adhesives manufacturer who was talking about labeling, and I said, "Tell me about the iconic Heineken bottle."
Yeah.
I said, "What's always intrigued me is that there's no visible label on a Heineken bottle. The label is in fact the bottle. It's almost as iconic as Coke, not quite, because it doesn't have those lovely curves, but it has a label that I thought was always sort of somehow embedded in the glass." And he said very knowledgeably, "Oh, that's clear on clear," as though that would be clear to me.
Okay, well, that's not clear to me.
No,
so what did that mean?
But what it means is that they have a labeling system. It is actually a label.
Yes.
And it's part of the bottle. It's the end of the bottle production piece. But they have the unique technology. And I said, "Have you told other bottle makers that story, for example?" And he said, "Well, not in the compelling way that I might have told you now." So, okay. And that's often how conversations about brands and their stories evolve.
And can I stop you there? Because isn't that funny? Because all of that is really about kind of the human reaction to these things. And that's actually what makes it more interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
And more compelling.
Exactly.
And actually tied into that is, you're quite right, you were talking about how we attach meaning to stories, is that it actually boosts our ability to trust somebody because you're more like the other fellow than if I'm giving you a bunch of facts.
Absolutely, absolutely. I recall HB ice cream, which I'm sure everybody in Ireland would know about.
Generations, my kids now, yeah.
I remember being involved in what they called brand architecture, which was really a fancy word for storytelling, uncovery, and or discovery. And one of the things that they discovered early in the piece of developing their particular storyline was the meaning, the emotional meaning of the brand in people's memories. Like as a child, I'm sure everybody can remember taking a sixpenny wafer and licking it from the inside out, if you will, or from the outside in, until all you had in your hand were 2 wafers. And that, in its storytelling, became the essence of describing what they call the organoleptic effect of eating ice cream. And
can you say that on camera? I apologise profusely if that's offensive to anybody.
That the organoleptic effect has to do with all the senses employed in the enjoyment of the ice cream. The challenge then for the communicators, in this case, the building of advertising and communication across all media, was how do you encapsulate or refresh the memory that the ice cream had for you as a child, so that you can continue to enjoy it.
And isn't that wonderful? Because you're right, because a story really kind of puts you into the picture where you're actually seeing, feeling, hearing, all of those kinds of things, what's going on. And that's actually what makes it more interesting and memorable to you anyway. But, so stories are hugely important, of course, for people who need to get up on a stage and to speak in front of an audience.
Yes.
But what about when you want to bring stories online? What are the challenges, if you like, of kind of making it easier for a story to live, to kind of get attention, to capture imagination, if you like, when people are creating a web page or a blog post or this is grand because obviously we're having a conversation and people can see what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So what about the written form? How does
it
translate?
If it's just in the written format, the challenge is greater because pictorial demonstration. And therein lies the art of selling newspapers, for example. Now, they can and do use pictures in newspapers, but for the most part, it's a reading exercise. And of course, we all know that newspapers everywhere are dying because of, the printed word has become more interesting in an electronic sense.
Yeah, everyone's got online.
So it's challenging, and for newspaper editors, the challenge starts with the headline. Is the headline compelling enough?
Yes.
Is it going to get enough readers in?
Well, actually, I have to say the headline, we kind of segue there. The headline is a really interesting one because I remember as a boy child in advertising that being told that the headline was 17 times more important than anything that you said. You might as well have said 100 times.
Correct.
Because if people didn't pay attention to that, then they didn't bother with what else was to follow. But now, of course, online, more and more, you also have to associate a picture with the headline, which you always did with an advertisement.
Correct.
Because if you don't, people won't spend long enough to pay attention to it to see if the story was interesting in the first place.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is that I'm old enough to remember the days when we used to say, you see 36,000 messages every day. Which one are you going to remember? Now, we're so inundated by megabytes and tetracycles and...
Oh, there he goes again. That's another rude word, but go on.
And we're just so inundated with messaging, starting with the email, starting your day with radio, finishing your day with television, checking your Facebook, your Twitter, your blogging.
150 times
You're the
a day,
expert on all of that, Eamonn, so you should know about that.
I do.
But the thing that I find very compelling still is that great communication, great storytelling depends absolutely on a great idea. So although multimedia has busied our minds, if you will, or created a lot of smoke and mirrors over years, essentially the stories we all remember are going to be the most compelling, the ones with a great idea attaching to them.
And I think that's a wonderful bit of advice, and maybe to kind of maybe just round out on that, because that is right, that you have to focus on an idea, because it's much easier to develop stories that kind of tie into that idea.
Yes.
Once you've got that in your head.
Yes. Yeah.
But if there were things that you think now, here are the no-nos, here are the dreadful sins that you should never ever pursue when you see people trying to create stories or ideas for their products or ideas, what would be top of your verboten list?
I think the biggest verboten is to want to immediately convey what you think as the brand owner is the essence of the brand, without actually asking anybody if they think it's interesting. It's a bit like talking to yourself and telling yourself that you're great.
All right.
And having no idea if that's going to cut the mustard with anybody else.
Yes, and bearing in mind that the audience actually is much more concerned about themselves than how great that you might think you are.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
and
there is that.
So message construction,
Yes.
story construction is where most people fall down.
Yes.
It's not understanding what the essence of the brand is.
Yes.
Like, for example, and storytelling the power of an idea can actually overtake and impede a brand in some way. For example, Volvo has created its storyline around safety.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem with that is the appearance of the product was always like a bit of a box with
Yes.
tank reinforcement. Now they've hauled back through design. They've improved that feature. They've addressed that problem. So beware of hanging all of your coats on one hook.
Yes, because then of course your brand's going to be attributed with all those things.
That becomes a brand attribute. I think that's an interesting example.
Yeah. I knew this was going to be a great topic, so I want you to thank you very much for coming in today, Noel. I think that we have had lots and lots of interesting thoughts and ideas about story today, and so maybe we'll do another version of this at another day.
Be delighted.
Thank you. So,
Be delighted.
And if you would like to know more about Noel and Brand Advocates, you'll find details of all the kinds of things that he does below. You're very, very welcome to check that out.
Yeah.
And so can I thank you for joining us today. You have been listening to Eamonn O'Brien, and this is the Reluctant Speakers Club Expert Series. And until the next time, happy content.